Hello, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, Israel discovers Hezbollah terror cells in the West Bank. The Republican Party launches its first ever campaign in the Jewish state, and some Israeli Air Force veterans reveal a high-tech invention that could literally change the way you see the world. I'm Natasha Kirchak here with the latest news in Israel. Israel's security services have just uncovered a number of terror cells in the West Bank, only this time they were created by Hezbollah. The Shin Bet has broken up several of the terror cells led by the Lebanese terror group, which were allegedly planning to carry out suicide bombings and ambush IDF patrols in the West Bank. Hezbollah operatives from the group's Unit 13 reportedly recruited the would-be terrorists online, using social media sites like Facebook to get in contact with them. The Lebanese terror group then provided funding to the Palestinians so that they could begin preparing explosive devices to attack Israel. The Shin Bet claims that Hezbollah has recently made it a top priority to spark terror attacks from afar, while trying not to show the group's involvement. It looks like the U.S. presidential race is not skipping over Israel. For the first time in history, the Republican Party is running field activities in Israel, all in hopes that American voters living in the Jewish state will vote for Donald Trump in the upcoming elections. The Israeli branch of the U.S. Republican Party began its campaign on Monday in a shopping mall in the central Israeli town of Modi'in, and is planning to target Israeli communities with the highest concentrations of American Israelis. There are around 300,000 Americans living in Israel that are eligible to vote in the U.S. presidential elections come November, and the Republican Party is eyeing them.
It's the first time that the Republican Party is reaching to the Israelis voters in such a massive campaign. The reason is that we have 300,000 Israelis that can vote, a huge part of them from the swing state, and a lot of them are young, that they are center and right-wing people. This is why they are Republicans. They don't know, they don't even remember that they can vote, and this time we're going to convince them that they have to go out and vote, because their number one issue, their only issue, is who will be better president to the Israeli government.
Tzvika Brot is heading the campaign, and he estimates that about 3/4 of American Israelis will support the Republican Party. But Democratic Party representatives are disputing his estimate, claiming Israeli and U.S. Jewish voters have always preferred the Democrats. Whether or not that's the case, it seems like more and more Israelis are considering Republican candidate Donald Trump.
I think Trump really understands Israel at a level that Hillary Clinton doesn't understand. And the Democratic Party basically, not just Hillary, but they've turned their back on Israel. Americans don't see Israel as an important issue anymore. They did, but recently, that's drifted in a different direction based on the cultural shift that we've seen happening within the United States.
As someone who comes from Pennsylvania, which is a swing state, I really believe that it's important for a president of the United States that supports Israel and stands beside Israel no matter what, and that is why I'm planning to vote Donald Trump for the President of the United States.
Back in May, a poll of Jewish Israelis found that 40% of the respondents backed Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton, and only 31% supported Trump. Trump has accused the Obama administration of failing to properly support Israel and has rejected last year's nuclear deal with Iran, like the Israeli government. Yet Trump has been heavily criticized for his lack of foreign policy knowledge, and has been accused of putting American security at risk with his, quote, politics of fear and isolation. Joining us in the studio today to talk about the Republican Party's campaign in Israel is Mark Zell, co-chair for the Israeli branch of Republicans overseas. Thanks so much for coming in.
Great to be here, Natasha.
So, to begin, we talked about this before, but this is one of the first times that we're seeing the Republican Party launch a campaign here in Israel. Can you tell us about that and why that's happening right now?
Well, first of all, let me make this clear. This is the Republicans overseas in Israel launching this campaign.
Right.
We are financing it, we're organizing it, we're coordinating it, of course, with the Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee. But this is our initiative. This is a way to get the 300 or 400,000 Americans who are eligible to vote out to the get their absentee ballots going and participate in a process that will have long-term effects on the relationship between the United States and Israel.
Absolutely. So I want to talk to you first about a Haaretz article that I read about you previously, where you quoted that you might even resign if Donald Trump was elected, but now obviously that's changed. Why has that changed?
I said what I said, and I said it because I supported Marco Rubio during the primary elections, and I actually, after it became clear that Donald Trump was going to be our nominee, I offered to resign, and my board rejected it, and the international board also rejected it, and they said, take a second look before you do anything rash, so, which I did. I looked into it. First of all, I had to say, listen, something I didn't expect when I made those comments to Haaretz is that the electorate, the voters, would decide to support Donald Trump in such huge numbers. I mean, he took 37 states and he got 14 million votes, which was historic in U.S. Primary election history. The other thing, of course, is I began to meet his people. I met his advisors on Israel. I met his members of his family. I met the advisors of what became the vice presidential nominee, Mike Pence from Indiana, and I realized that there was a different story here. There was a Donald Trump, his public persona, which we all know about. You know, this is a lot of bombast and maybe somebody would even say demagoguery, but behind the scenes is a successful businessman who's built a very serious international business empire. You don't do that by acting like a reality show candidate, okay? So there are two sides to him, and this was confirmed to me by a United States senator, I don't need to mention his name, who told me in Cleveland, for example, that he had met with Trump on a couple of occasions, and he had also supported Rubio in the primaries, and when he met with Trump, he was surprised. One of the things he found that in a private meeting, outside the public limelight, he was attentive, he had done his homework, he asked questions, and most important, he listened. It wasn't like he knew everything. And he said, the senator said when he saw this, and he was extremely impressed and said, this guy has the temperament and the character to be president of the United States. Now he's going about it in an unorthodox way. This is a very unorthodox election. He's shaking up a lot of traditional views.
So speaking of that, and also talking about his history as a businessman, one of the major things that we're seeing in the news this week is the fact that Trump has failed to show his tax forms to the world, unlike other candidates in the past. What is your response to that, to people who say, well, is it true that he has the fortune that he claims that he has?
Well, I mean, this is a kind of issue, Natasha, that the press and the Democrats have been focusing on. Instead of dealing with anything of substance, they're dealing with this kind of silly question. All right, he's addressed this consistently through the primaries, and I'm not even going to deal with it here. I mean, he has filled out and supplied to the federal government detailed financial disclosure far more elaborate than anything he would report on his tax returns to the United States. That's all available. The public has it. This is just a red herring. That's an expression in English. So let's talk about who he's running against. I mean, that's what all of this is. All these questions of this sort are designed to deflect the debate from who he's running against to these kind of ancillary issues. You got Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. Who are these people? Well, this Hillary Clinton is a piece of work. I mean, she was Secretary of State for 4 or 5 years, whatever it was, and she presided over the most disastrous period in U.S. foreign policy that I can remember. I mean, one failure after the next, whether you talk about the Arab Spring, the fall of Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Syria, the implosion of Syria, the Russian reset, which was a disaster, Crimea, Ukraine, China, and the big daddy of them all was the Iran-U.S. agreement on the nuclear program. So, which you've got here. I mean, and that's just a partial list. I mean, the Democrats like to say, well, we need somebody with a lot of experience. Well, she has a lot of experience, but she has no common sense. She has no judgment. That's the first piece. The second piece is she's a pathological liar. I mean, she does. It's amazing. I mean, she'll even lie about her name, okay, and her origin and her military service and what happened to her when she was in Bosnia at the airport in 1996. Those are silly things. But she lies about the big things, too. She lied about Benghazi to the face of the victims' parents and families. And she's lying now daily about this whole situation with these emails. That every day something new comes out. Just this week, a Judicial Watch discovery of emails proved that while she was Secretary of State, she was doing influence peddling for the Clinton Foundation, which collected hundreds of millions of dollars. I think a couple $1 billion over the time of since Bill Clinton left and Hillary left the White House in 2001. I mean, it's enormous sums of money. She claimed to have left the White House broke. And her tax returns, which she did disclose, showed that she's earned $240 million, she and her husband. I mean, one lie after the next. And the last thing, Natasha, the last thing is the corruption. I mean, this is an influence peddling juggernaut, the Clinton family. And the idea that they've actually sold out the national interest. They were talking about the uranium deposits they arranged to have turned over into the hands of a Russian company. I mean, one thing after the next. There's no shame here, and we're talking about putting her back in the White House. I mean, Donald Trump is an angel compared to this lady.
So let's turn our focus to Israel a little bit more specifically. Sure. What would a Trump presidency look like for Israel?
Well, first of all, I think it's going to be a presidency that has Israel's back. I've said that the main reason that I became and agreed to become a Trump supporter is that I got the clear and unequivocal message from the campaign. I've seen it in terms of deeds and actions since I've become to support him, that he is solidly behind Israel. I mean, he is talking about defanging the Iran nuclear agreement, as soon as he gets into office. He made a statement, which is an incredible statement, that Israelis have the right to build anywhere they choose in the land of Israel. That's an extraordinary statement for a candidate. He's, during the terror attacks, when the Obama White House would ignore the victims here in Israel, he was quick on his Twitter program and in public to condemn the violence of Israeli victims, just as he was quick to condemn the horrible tragedy that occurs in France and in Belgium, in Orlando and San Bernardino. This is a guy that has Israel's back. He's not throwing us under the bus. And in the case of the Democrats, you've got 8 years to prove it. Now, Hillary Clinton, she could have said, I don't agree with Obama about what he's done in Israel. But this is the lady that picked up the phone, not once, twice, maybe 3 times. Every time they decided to approve a building plan in Jerusalem for Jewish residents to close in a balcony or build a new house, apartment complex, she gets on the phone and berates our prime minister for 45 minutes. I mean, she's got more important things to do, you would think, than to worry about, an apartment complex in Jerusalem. I mean, she's got the Russians, she's got the Chinese, she's got the North Koreans, for God's sake. The Middle East is going up in flames, and she's berating Bibi Netanyahu about apartments in Jerusalem, and on and on and on. This is this is what we're voting about in this election.
So my final question for you is:
Sure.
How do you think that this campaign, the Republican Party, that Republican oversees, that's the name of the party,
Republicans oversees Israel.
Israel. There we go. Republican oversees Israel will affect the outcome of the elections. Are we going to see people actually voting in favor of Donald Trump as a result of this campaign?
Well, I certainly hope so. And I believe, everybody, I walk around here every day wearing this Trump button. And the amazing thing is how many people come up to me, both Americans and non-Americans, and say, right on, okay. Yeah, we could very well have a significant effect. And by the way, in the year 2000, right, there was an election between Bush and Gore. And the election came down to the state of Florida. And in the state of Florida, it came down a few counties in southern Florida. And the difference between the two candidates that determined the president of the United States was 537 votes. You know how many votes came from Israel during that election for George Bush? 1,500. If they hadn't voted, Al Gore would have been the president of the United States. So yes, the votes here can have a significant impact. And there's another thing they need to know is that these votes in Israel, as important as they are to us, are part of a larger expatriate vote. Close to 9 million Americans have the right to vote around the world. And they're angry in this election. They're really angry, Democrats and Republicans, about what Obama and Hillary Clinton did when they passed with the law called FATCA, Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, in 2010, which has turned Americans, probably you too, Natasha, into pariahs when it comes to doing ordinary banking transactions.
When you're living abroad.
Yeah, I mean, it's become a real burden. Everything you can't move unless you give up all your rights of privacy under the FATCA. That's why Republicans here in Israel are fighting it in the courts, and we fought it in the Knesset, and Republicans overseas are fighting it in the United States courts too, to have it declared unconstitutional and to have it repealed. And the only way that's going to happen, the repeal of FATCA, because Obama said he's going to veto it, and Hillary Clinton will veto any repeal, is if a Republican sits in the Oval Office.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and shedding some light on this recent campaign that you guys have just started, and hopefully we'll have you back again soon.
Well, I hope so. Great to meet you, Natasha.
Great to meet you too.
Okay.
Lots of Olympic medalists are beginning to make their way back home from Rio, and while they're probably receiving warm welcomes, we're willing to bet that none of them are being greeted with the same enthusiasm as Israel's Olympic winners. Nearly 1,000 cheering fans gathered at Ben Gurion International Airport late last night to celebrate the triumphant return of Israel's two bronze-winning judokas from Rio. Both Yarden Jerbi and Ori Sasson have already received congratulatory telephone calls from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and graced the covers of national publications. Last night, when the two athletes arrived to Israel, they were constantly approached in the airport terminal for selfies and hugs. The thrilled crowd waved flags, sang patriotic songs, and showered flowers on the athletes, who instantly became national heroes upon their earning the 8th and 9th medals ever to be awarded in Israeli Olympic history. Jerbi scored the first Israeli medal since 2008 with her August 9th defeat of Japan's Miko Tashiro. Just 3 days later, Sasson clinched the second by beating Cuba's Alex Mendoza. By the way, the Egyptian athlete who made headlines by refusing to shake Sasson's hand after being defeated by his Israeli rival in an earlier match was not given the same happy homecoming. After being the target of widespread condemnation, Islam El-Shahabi was reprimanded for his poor sportsmanship by the International Olympic Committee and Egyptian Olympic officials, and unceremoniously was sent home. He's even reportedly quit the sport. Israel supporters have long charged that the foreign media fails to accurately portray the Jewish state in the news. But is that a fair accusation? ILTV's Aaron Viner sat down with the former head of the Israeli government press office, Daniel Seaman, to see if he believes Israel is truly subjected to biased reporting.
Is the international press biased against Israel? Well, I spent a long part of my term as the director of the government press office fighting. I won't say that they're in general biased against Israel, but there is a lot of bias. And it comes from both objective and subjective reasons. The objective reasons are that Israel is free, and the journalists can work around freely here, but there's another side, and the other side is not free, and the journalists want to gain access, and sometimes they give in to the pressures applied to them on the other side, and therefore, and I've encountered this numerous times, they will be, first off, the people they hire have to be particular people that the Palestinian side would like them to employ. Second, they have to be careful in things that they say, because therefore afterwards they will not have cooperation with the other side to the story here. Israel does not take action against journalists who we feel are telling the story in a biased manner. The other side not only takes sanctions, but it also threatens them. Very often the journalists omit that kind of information, which is also shows a certain bias. They employ Palestinians, which in general should be okay. But when they believe that people in this society, which is not free, which is under the responsibility of not only a terrorist gang, but people who are not subject to democracy, basically, as I had an Arab journalist tell me, he said, the worst that can happen with Israel is that we will take away their press card. They don't know who'll be waiting for them in their kitchen when they come home in the evening. So when it's your life compared to any sanctions, people are going to favor their lives. And therefore, the foreign journalists employ these Arabs with them and aren't aware of the fact that many of them are either subject to threats and coercion, or they agree with the policies of their population and also see themselves. And I've had conversations with many of them admitted, we see ourselves as being part of the battle against Israel in the profession that we do as journalism. So you have them relying, since many of the journalists come here do not know the language, do not know Arabic, do not have the connections, they're relying on their Palestinians, yet not holding them to professional standards. And therefore, the moment something happens here, they will report, and they will report it in a biased manner. The people back home in London, in Washington, in Paris, etc., aren't aware of this, and they take them at face value. Simple thing, when a terrorist attack occurs, if somebody was shot by the police, the first thing they'll report is a Palestinian shot, not identifying the fact. And this comes from their correspondent, who is usually a Palestinian themselves. So they don't address the fact that this was a terrorist attack and this was a terrorist who was shot by the Israeli police. They leave the impression. This is a bias. And when they don't correct that, when they continue, now if they did it 10, 15 years ago, when I was working with them at that time, and you address it and you bring it to their attention, and they say they're going to handle it, well, you say, okay, one time you can understand, second time, it's a very intense atmosphere here. But when they continue doing this time and time again, year after year after year, any logical person will ask the question, what's up with the foreign media? Why are they behaving in such an unprofessional manner?
All right, guys, now turning from the past to the future, imagine being able to avoid traffic by zipping around the sky in your own personal robotic pod. Sounds like you'd have to live in a futuristic sci-fi movie for that to happen, right? Well, it turns out that's not necessarily the case. One Israeli company believes it has the answer to solving most of our transportation and even housing problems by turning to space. Skytrain is a NASA Space Act company with Israeli roots that's currently headquartered in California. Company executives believe the world is being choked by vehicular traffic on the ground, and that their Skypod system of travel will soon be in our horizons. The company has patented a high-speed, elevated personal rapid transportation system called the Skytrain. These computer-controlled two-person jet-like vehicles are able to not only transport passengers more quickly and safely, but also in a greener and more economical manner. Its monorail-type network wouldn't take up space like light rails do today, and people would be able to use individual pods to get somewhere whenever they choose rather than having to wait for more conventional forms of mass transit. The Skytrain's magnetic technology requires only about a third of the energy that a hybrid Prius car does, while being able to zoom at speeds of around 155 miles an hour. It's not only the travel benefits that are astronomical. The company's CEO and chairman Jerry Sanders says that Skytrain is relatively cheap to build. For example, it cost about $160 million to build each kilometer of track for Jerusalem's light rail, while Skytrain would have cost the taxpayers just $6 million per kilometer. A series of poles connect the stations with the overhead guideways, which will have automatic switches to send pods in different directions. Does this all seem like a far-off dream? Well, it's not. Skytrain has already signed deals with European airports, Nigeria, and even with the United Arab Emirates. The good news for us here in Israel is that there are actually plans in the works to build Skytrain networks in Netanya and Herzliya, although it may take some time to receive government approval. Israel has the highest average traffic density among the 34-member OECD group of advanced economies, and the Skytrain would do a lot more than tackle the issue. The dramatic improvement in the way we travel would alleviate the intense demand for centrally located dwellings, which would eventually lead to a reduction in the high cost of housing in Israel. And now it's time for our segment Today in History. Exactly 103 years ago to date, one of Israel's most influential politicians ever was born, Menachem Begin. Begin was a member of Israel's first ever Knesset, and he actually founded the Likud party, which leads the Israeli government today. But that's not all. In 1977, he served as the sixth prime minister of Israel, and today he's warmly remembered for having reached a peace deal with Egypt during the Camp David Accords. He even received a Nobel Peace Prize for his work alongside Egyptian leader Anwar Sadat. So don't be surprised if you visit Israel and see tons of streets and buildings named after the influential Israeli leader. Begin played a hugely important role in developing the state of Israel, and nobody wants to forget it. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. They say that humans travel all over the world in search of what they need, but they always end up finding it when they return home. So today's word is lachzor, which means return in Hebrew. Today, Israel's Olympic medalists returned home to Israel after their exciting wins in Rio, and their lachzor la'aretz, or return to the land, was met with hundreds of people singing and dancing in their honor at the airport. The inspiring display actually isn't that uncommon. Here in the Holy Land, every time a Jewish person immigrates to Israel, their decision is celebrated as their lachzor to the homeland. Just try hanging out at the airport when a flight full of new immigrants makes it to Israel. You'll be inspired to lachzor yourself. Let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Wednesday is expected to be partly cloudy with a high of 85 degrees. The clouds should stay out through Thursday with the temperature climbing up to 86. All right, everybody, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.78 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to check out our next update at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for watching, and see you tonight.